Hello, Liberation Hour. This is your host, Comrade Felicity, coming at you pre-recorded. Yes, folks, I am in the knee-deep in packing and finals and all of the things as I am getting ready to move out of state and graduate college and do all of the many exciting things that come along with graduation. And so, yes, I am recording from my silly little apartment. There are boxes everywhere, so there will be no footage of me today. I have a lot of stories for us to cover, actually, so I think that, I'm excited to be back live. I was not able to go live or do the news last week as things were just really freaking busy. So as a little disclaimer, they're currently doing work on my apartment complex. So if you hear drilling, hammers, or, any just the general sound of construction in the background, that is why. So apart from that, folks, welcome back to Liberation Hour. This is your host, Comrade Felicity, and I am so excited to cover the news with y'all today. Okay, so it is April 22nd. A couple days ago, it was hashtag 420. We love to see it. And so if you are, if you happen to also celebrate the immortal holiday of Weed Day, then congrats. I'm right there with you, comrade. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. So I have 3 different stories for us today. 2 from one of my favorite publications, Labor Notes, and another from Al Jazeera. And today we're going to be covering a few different but same stories on, basically, just labor and resistance from imperialism. So my first story for today is from Labor Notes. It's called A Lack of Democracy in the United Farm Workers Gave Chavez Immunity. So a little bit of background here. Actually, the Women's Commission and the American Party of Labor did, in fact, discuss this because recently it has come out that Chavez was the perpetrator of horrendous sexual crimes against multiple women within the farm workers' labor movement. This is not, unfortunately, this is not a rare occurrence. We have to remember how labor movements and movements in general can become prone to actions like this by leaders with the... Essentially what I'm trying to say here is the concept of essentializing a certain person within the movement can often create a situation in which that person is given a lot of power and, as this article is stating, immunity over wrongdoings that they commit. We have to remember that the concept of like the quote unquote great man, or this person that is supposedly supposed to be an amazing person, can in fact perpetrate terrible crimes. No one is immune from this. It's a discussion that we need to be consistently having, I feel, in the labor movement and in our general party structure and how we confront these things. The Women's Commission with the APL has actually put out, I think, a pretty good statement on this. I do not have it pulled up here, but if you're interested, please go and take a look at what we have to say on it, because again, no movement is necessarily immune from having these issues, and it is something that we need to combat head on. It is only a detriment to the movement when we allow behaviors and tendencies like this to continue. And while Chavez might have been an important figure at the time for people, it's still important to recognize, it's still, I would say, even more important to recognize his wrongdoings, the problems that he has perpetuated, and, the underlying systemic issues that are rooted in this. For those who don't know, he brutally sexually assaulted, also known as raped, a woman, or multiple women. I want to say since they were young children. Not children, I want to say like teenagers. I could be mistaken by that. But this was a story that came out, I want to say, a month or 2 ago. and it's incredibly important to cover. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start reading and giving my notes on this piece by Jane Slaughter. It was released April 6, 2026 at Labor Notes. Please go ahead and check it out if you are interested, and let's go ahead and keep going. Okay. In 2011, Frank Bardaki, we're terrible with names on this show, so I do not know how to, just go read the article if you want to know his last name. Published an 800-page history of the Farm Workers Union, trampling out the vintage, Cesar Chavez, and the two souls of the United Farm Workers. It opened my eyes to the reasons the UFW became a shadow of its former self. Bardaki states the book starts the book with an epigraph, a quote from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. Quote, "Oh, what a fall was there, my countrymen. Then I and you and all of us fell down." End quote. Bardaki was a farm worker in the fields of the Salinas Valley I don't know if I'm saying that right, for 6 seasons in the 1970s. When he decided to write his book later, he went back to his carpool co-workers, finding them still at work in the fields. In 1994, the Union had been thoroughly defeated for nearly 10 years, but his old friends were afraid even to mention its name, where the foreman might hear. I interviewed Frank Bardaki after a New York Times investigation revealed evidence that Chavez had sexually abused young girls who were volunteering with the Union. And the allegation was that he also assaulted Union co-founder Dolores Huerta. That's from Jane Slaughter. Jane Slaughter. The revelations about Cesar Chavez as a sexual predator, many people have said they were, quote, surprised but not shocked, or shocked but not surprised. How do you react? Frank Bardaki. The abuse of Anna Murguia, apologies if I'm saying that wrong, was rumored at the time among UFW staff, primarily at the La Paz headquarters. Many of the rumors originated with Anna's stepmother, Kathy Murguia. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that I'm saying that last name's wrong. But people just didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to look into it very deeply because Caesar was one of these powerful men who could do anything he damn well pleased. He was immune from investigation. It puts him in the category that seems to be so prevalent these days, or at least more known about. Powerful men who can do whatever they want to do, including groom children and abuse women, and they don't have to answer for it. Question. Where did that power come from? Answer. For the men, we know about it. It comes from money or political connections or celebrity. Where did Caesar's power come from? The first answer is that he had just turned a losing 1965 grape strike into the most successful boycott in American history, at the conclusion of which in 1970, farm workers won the most substantial contracts they'd ever had: a hiring hall, grievance procedures, seniority lists. They'd never had these before. That's the first reason he had power. Through that, he became a celebrity. He was the organizer, the architect, and the main energy behind that boycott. A hero and a celebrity with the kind of immunity that modern celebrities have. But the second reason was an internal reason within the UFW. Everyone within the organization owed their job to Caesar. He appointed everybody. He could discharge anybody at his will, which he often did. That wasn't just theoretical power. Periodic purges pulsed through the organization, so you didn't disagree with Caesar except at the peril of losing your job. Those were the two reasons that no one wanted to follow up on the rumors of abuse. He was an authentic hero who had led and directed that boycott, and everyone in his organization owed their job to him. Okay, so I'm going to stop there real fast. I want to, just with that excerpt, because we do have to move on to the next article soon, but I do want to address this head on. So when we're talking about power dynamics, it is important I think this is an important discussion within Marxist-Leninist organizations. Now, the UFW was not Marxist-Leninist. It was obviously progressive, it was obviously pro-labor, but we can see some really key problems here, specifically with the way that it was organized, where one person, the great man of the organization, so to speak, had unquestionable amounts of power and was able to unquestionably control a lot of people's lives with really no supervision. This is why, Lenin's concept of democratic centralism is so important. It cannot be one person making all of the decisions. It has to be a democratic choice, and it has to be open and free for discussion. The thing about a model such as this, a big critique that I think that we can have that would definitely, I think, coincide with a lot of these sexual assault and abuse allegations, or I shouldn't say allegations because I do believe these women, is a lot of those actions happen as a result of someone like Cesar Chavez, and it's not specifically Cesar Chavez himself, but more of the structure which he exists in, which enables him to be able to do that with the in addition to the structures of patriarchy that have more often than not reared its ugly head and really buried itself within the organization. How do we combat that? Well, we need to have a strong dialectical understanding of patriarchy, how it affects the system, and how we can actively fight it within our own organizations. This obviously was just not happening at the time. And we can combat this as well through democratic centralism and allowing, for things like a women's commission, which we do have in the APL, to speak and speak up and have like actual organizational power to combat head-on problems like this. And so I feel for these women deeply. I think that it is incredibly just horrendous what happened to them, and we need to face it. We need to face it head on. We need to face it without fear or guilt, and we need to scientifically analyze it and understand how we can keep this from happening in other revolutionary organizations. And so I again, what these women went through should not have happened and did not have to happen. And it is deep organizational structural problems that allowed for someone like Chavez to essentially use his power to exploit these women and their vulnerable position, and the fact that it isn't just these women but also the workers within the movement at large. He should not have been allowed in the first place to hold that much power. He should have been checked. He should have been consistently checked by other organizational functions. It should not have just been this person. And so I think that this is a larger systemic issue that was replicated through the organization that allowed someone like Cesar Chavez to basically do whatever he wanted. And so I am going to link this article in the description because I do think it's an incredibly important conversation. There are other articles that I would like to get to today, so I'm going to go ahead and stop it there, even though we didn't get to read a ton. But please review it. It's shorter. I think it's very good though. Thank you to Jane Slaughter for doing for writing this up. It seems like a question and answer. It looks like she actually did an interview with this person. So if you're interested, go ahead and go to the link in the description. Anyway, okay, so moving on. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Starbucks Workers Union. Starbucks is bargaining backwards, baristas say. Okay, so this was written on April 16th, 2026 by Jenny Brown with labor notes. If you are not familiar, the Starbucks stores across the country have been in the middle of unionizing. Some of them are fully unionized, others are not. Many of them are currently striking and holding the corporation of Starbucks accountable with one of the highest paid CEOs in the country. And so let's go ahead and take a look at what they have to say here. Again, we will not be able to read through this entire article as the last thing I want to look at is incredibly important. So we're only going to spend about, 5 to 6 minutes on this. But let's go ahead and get started. Union baristas are finally back at the negotiating table with Starbucks, but the workers charge that rather than progressing, the company is reopening already agreed upon issues. Quote, they're trying to move backwards on issues we've already settled instead of settling the few that we have left, said Mina Leon, a barista in downtown Manhattan who struck for 2 months to get the company back to the table. Quote, these were not small details. These were things that we had already fought for and won after months in bargaining in 2024, said Jasmine Laley, a Buffalo, New York barista and the member of the Starbucks Workers Union bargaining team. The union has filed unfair labor practices against the company for regressing bargaining. Those join 600 other labor law violations, which are still unresolved. During the 4 years of the organizing campaign, the company has racked up a record number of violations and still owes millions in back pay to workers. The company said in reopening agreements to, quote, reflect current business realities, customer expectations, and partner interests. Starbucks calls its workers partners. Okay. Struck to get back to table. That is a subheading within the article. After a year of no talks, workers at hundreds of stores struck in November, December, and January to force the company back to the negotiating table. Around 230 stores struck at the peak of the walkouts. Starbucks Workers United now represents 550 locations out of 10,000 run by the company in the United States. Negotiations broke off in late 2024, and while the sides went to a mediator in April 2025, the company refused to move on wages and staffing demands. The union has been demanding $20 an hour as starting pay for all stores. They've now scaled back to asking for $17 an hour for the lowest paid workers. Baristas in 43 states start at 16 and under. They also want annual 4% increases. Token raises over the years have been eaten up by inflation, leaving workers worse off, baristas said. The other big issue is staffing. Quote, understaffed stores have led to long wait times for customers, while baristas who want more hours aren't getting enough to pay their bills, said Laley. Not enough hours. This is another subheading. The union is demanding 3 people in stores at all times, as an answer to both overwork and safety issues. The company is notorious for hiring additional workers, while current workers are asking for more hours to survive. The union is demanding more hours for existing employees before new hires. Baristas say the wages are constrained, and constrained hours are such that they have to rely on food stamps and have to sign up for Medicaid, since they can't get enough hours to qualify for the company's health care plan. Very fishy indeed. New negotiating sessions are scheduled soon. The union is asking community members to create pressure by leafleting non-union stores on April 21st, asking customers to avoid the company until a contract is in place. The union is also asking people to spread the word about deleting the Starbucks app. Quote, we need you to stop buying Starbucks and delete the Starbucks app from your phone, Leon told a union crowd in Manhattan on Sunday. No contract, no coffee. Okay, so that's the end of the article. Just had to burp there, sorry. Don't want to burp into the mic. Okay, so what are we seeing here? What's the vibe? First and foremost, full support for the Starbucks baristas who are currently striking and not. I think that it is so important to get the word out about what Starbucks has been doing with their incredibly unfair labor practices, and the fact that, this is actually something that I've wanted to touch on more on this show that I just really haven't had the chance to, but I think this is a perfect time. So kind of widening our scope here from just the Starbucks barista strike and everything that they're fighting for currently. I currently work for a gas station chain called Circle K. And I'm actually, my last day is on Friday. Yay me. But something that I have noticed that I think is going to become a much bigger problem in the next few years is the gig economy and the use of gig workers to replace regular employees of companies. We're already seeing it happen, so that companies can cut back and cut corners on things like healthcare and paying for labor generally. Basically using the gig economy instead of actually having real employees that are through the company that have a right to healthcare and benefits. A lot of these companies want to start using things like ShiftSmart. ShiftSmart is something that Circle K actually currently uses, and it's basically just an extra set of hands that comes in to help. The thing is that we actually always need more help, because having one person on shift can be really hard, especially when you have a million things to do. But of course the company doesn't want to hire more people and have the possibility, because here's the thing that is the most expensive for companies is labor. That is the most expense so to speak, that they will have to pay for. The last thing that they want to do is have to pay more than they absolutely have to for labor. And so something that I have been personally seeing at my own job is the use of gig workers through a third-party service that work for Circle K but don't actually have entitlement to Circle K benefits or anything that Circle K allows for its actual employees. I think that this is going to become a much larger problem and a much larger phenomena that we're going to be seeing over the next few years. I wouldn't be surprised if regular customer service employees, the lowest of the low-level employees, will be essentially phased out of the labor force and replaced by gig workers who have even less rights, even less ability to unionize, even less ability to bargain and demand better wages, demand better benefits, or even have access to benefits. I'm very worried about this just because of the fact that it makes getting a job that much harder, and it also is basically supporting the division of the working class and the labor movement even further to a point where organizing is going to be so incredibly difficult. It's not impossible, absolutely not. But what we're seeing right now is the fact that gigantic corporations and companies and capital, what they want to do is break up the labor movement as much as possible. Seeing things like Starbucks baristas going and striking and saying, screw this, we're not dealing with these terrible conditions anymore, is pushing companies to, instead of just come to the table and bargain, to look to other third-party labor to basically come in and be scabs. I think that this is going to be this is a problem on the horizon that might already be here before we even know it. And you know, it's something that I'm genuinely very worried about. I'm seeing it in my own customer service position. And I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing it at places like Starbucks because they simply don't want to pay their workers a living wage. This is a good way to get around it. So as it pertains to the Starbucks baristas, support them in their strikes, support them in their efforts. Please, whatever you can, please do it. Go out, flyer for them, support the workers' union, whatever they need, whenever they need it. If you have time during your week, on the weekends, whatever the case may be, go out and support your local unionized Starbucks and unions in general. And so let's go ahead and move on to the last story of the day. This is from Al Jazeera, Cuba. So you might be asking yourself, Comrade, why are you not covering Iran right now? Girl, there's so much happening. There's so much happening. I can't even keep up. First there's a deal, then there's not a deal, then there's a deal, then there's not a deal, then the Strait of Hormuz is open for about 12 seconds, then it's closed again, then we're bombing, then we're not bombing. The only thing I can say definitively is that Israel sucks. That Israel very much wants to continue to go to war with Iran and Lebanon. And so what I would like to cover currently was something that we can see is on the horizon and is continuing to rear its ugly head is the imperialist interest in Cuba and everything that it is currently going through. I actually have a silly little bonus episode surprise that I am currently planning with an influencer who has been on this show, but I'm going to leave it a little bit of a surprise on their trip to Cuba, and you can probably already guess who it is, but for the sake of the surprise, I'm not going to say it. But that episode will be releasing, I believe, on Sunday. I'm super excited because this is going to be such a fun bonus. So in preparation for that, I do want to cover this story because it's so important. So this is from Al Jazeera. This is, let's see who wrote this. This is from the Associated Press. Cuban president defiant amid U.S. pressure and energy blockade threats. Miguel Diaz-Canel marks anniversary of Socialist Revolutionary Declaration under threat of U.S. attacks. So let's go ahead and dive right into this. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel has said that his country does not seek conflict with the United States, but is prepared to fight if necessary, as Cuba marks the anniversary of its socialist revolutionary character amid the threat of U.S. attacks. Diaz-Canel struck a defiant tone on Thursday in remarks before a crowd marking the 65th anniversary of Fidel Castro's declaration of the socialist nature of the Cuban revolution and the failed invasion at the Bay of Pigs by forces aligned with the U.S. the day after. Quote, "The moment is extremely challenging and calls upon us once again, as on April 16th, 1961, to be ready to confront serious threats, including military aggression," the president said. Quote, "We do not want it, but it is our duty to prepare to avoid and, if it becomes inevitable, to defeat it." President Donald Trump has threatened that the U.S. could overthrow the Cuban government, a longtime source of ire for Washington, and has ratcheted up energy restrictions meant to squeeze the island's economy. Quote, "We may stop by Cuba after we finish this," Trump said earlier this week, stating that his attention could turn to Cuba after the end of the U.S.-Israel war on Iran, which we are losing currently. I just inserted that. A U.S. energy blockade and an end to oil shipments from Venezuela after the U.S. Abducted former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in January have caused deteriorating conditions on the island. Fuel shortages and energy blackouts have roiled the island for weeks, heaping strain on workers and businesses. Even before those increased restrictions, Cuba's economy has suffered from decades of economic embargo from the U.S., along with economic mismanagement and political repression that prompted many Cubans to leave the country. Okay, so stopping there for a second. Okay, I'm a little frustrated by that excerpt because I'm not saying that there isn't mismanagement happening, but it seems like and I'm not going to call Cuba necessarily socialist because I don't think that's entirely accurate. Not saying that I don't support their project towards a form of some kind of socialism, some kind of progressivism. To sit here and say some, economic mismanagement and political repression in Cuba, does it exist? Sure. I mean, it exists in almost every state, in almost every country. In every country. But you don't hear that when they're talking about, and here's the thing, I think Al Jazeera is generally pretty left-leaning, but obviously they are owned by, I think, Qatar? I don't know if it's the Qatari government or if it's a Qatari business or whatever the heck it is. Could we not call the Trump's, the American government's imperialist war on Iran and the way that it's handling the Strait of Hormuz economic mismanagement? Could we not call that economic mismanagement? Could we not call the fact that China has not broken ties with the genocidal state of Israel and still does, weapons deals with them economic mismanagement? Could we not call, or I guess not economic mismanagement, just straight up, appealing to genocidal Zionists. Could we not? There is so much economic mismanagement that exists within the imperialist apparatus and within the imperial core that I just find it a little bit disingenuous and dishonest to sit here and put this label on Cuba as if it's not usually pretty. I feel like labeling Cuba this way is always a distortion. It's always a distortion of the true facts because the fact of the matter is that the embargo has 100% at the time been the reason for Cuba's economy being having consistent issues. I really don't love that framing because I feel like it's really just ignoring the very obvious, gigantic reason why this is happening. Sure. There is probably economic mismanagement that's happening that we should, in good faith, critique and look at as real economic mismanagement. I just find it really hard in this article to completely trust Al Jazeera's reporting on this when the fact of the matter is that the main reason why Cuba's economy has been suffering so much is directly at the feet of American imperialism and the embargo that has been there for more than 65 years. So I just think that I don't love that framing. Moving forward, a vote at the United Nations in 2025 demanding an end to U.S. embargo passed with 165 votes in favor and 7 against, including the U.S., Israel, Argentina, and Hungary. The resolution has been passed annually for more than 30 years. Cuba is not a failed state. Cuba is a besieged state, Diaz-Canel said on Thursday. Cuba is a state facing multidimensional aggression, economic warfare, an intensified blockade, and an energy blockade. That's the end of the article. Yes. Just yes. This is true. And again, we should never not be willing to critique and give critique in good faith about other states, because the fact is that there is no such thing as a perfect state. Communism is not a perfect system. It is a system that is, I think, the closest that you could ever get to something quote unquote being perfect, which I just don't think that's a very good metric, because it is based in scientific fact, in the scientific method. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that critique is not necessary. It absolutely is necessary. But the thing is that that's not happening in this article. Oh, I also, I mean, it is through the Associated Press. So, I mean, I can't totally crap all over Al Jazeera for that one. But either way, it's one of those things that I really resent it when publications try to make it come across as though Cuba is in some way responsible for this, when in fact it is not. Cuba is just existing as a state that will not allow imperialism and capitalism and neoliberalism to completely ravage its economy and its labor and its people. It has some of the best healthcare in the world. It has some of the most progressive family laws in the world. It has some of the most progressive housing and food sovereignty and all of these different things. It has some of the most progressive environmental policy in the world. They are doing everything that they can with what they have to make the lives of their citizens better. Are they always perfect? No. Is it always perfect? No. Should it be consistently critiqued? Yes, as all things should. But the fact is that the U.S. is currently strangling Cuba and strangling the Cuban people and the Cuban people's ability to exist and survive. So I'm not going to accept some kind of framing of, well, there is economic mismanagement. Yeah, and the U.S. economy is all speculation. It's a speculation economy. Okay? If that's not economic mismanagement, I don't know what is. So anyway, we're coming to the end of our time here, folks. My special segment for y'all today is on basically, once again, trans folks and the criminalization of being trans in the United States. It is with my lovely comrade Marina from the Great Plains region. I am so excited to present this to you guys. She is once again wonderful in this episode, very well spoken, and we have a great conversation. So I can't wait to show you guys this episode. I will catch y'all next week, hopefully in studio. We'll see how it goes. And I'll see y'all later. Bye. Okay, everybody, welcome back to this next episode of the Liberation Hour. It is currently Saturday, March 28th, and I am here with Comrade Marina. Currently recording, I believe this is either the 41st episode, I believe so. We're somewhere in that range. I know this is one of the last. And so, welcome back, Comrade, and I'm so excited to have you back on the show.
I am really happy to be back. I'm glad that we have this kind of forum to talk about these issues currently.
Yeah. So today we're going to be covering, a broad topic, but, it's very specific to trans folks, and it's the criminalization of being trans. Um, this is not only the treatment of trans prisoners, but also the treatment of trans people in different unsafe states, and the treatment of trans folks just in general by the current administration and society at large as it stands. I think to get us started on the topic, Marina, what do you think is the most, I'm not saying what's the most important issue necessarily, but what the issue that we want to center currently as a leading issue, but one of many that we're facing in the moment.
Yeah, I think to kind of put a broad to paint with a broad brush here, I think we can safely say that the Trump regime and its kind of state and local allies are making good on their promised desire to eliminate transgender people from public life.
Hmm.
We are seeing in the last few months since I was on back last, there's been a tremendous increase in uh, anti-transgender legislation. Kansas, the state where I live in, passed one of the most sweeping bathroom ban and license uh, restrictions for trans people in the country. The law contains several uh, stipulations, specifically removing gender markers from trans people's licenses, banning people using bathrooms that did not uh, apply to their assigned sex at birth, as well as allowing for private citizens to initiate lawsuits for violation of privacy against trans people who they perceive to be in the bathrooms. So that's very, very serious. We also have the most recent law in Idaho, which not only bans trans people from using the proper bathrooms, but also creates a pathway to life imprisonment. I believe it is 5 years in prison for a second offense and a life imprisonment for a fourth time offense, being arrested for using the proper bathroom. With everything going on as well in the federal prison system with the denial of healthcare to trans patients, as well as the use of conversion therapy techniques, it's pretty obvious why there is this desire to get trans people into prisons. That's very, very troubling. And then there's also the early reports of anti-trans hate groups petitioning the FDA to begin tracking information on trans women. It's never a good thing when there is a push to start tracking and creating registries of repressed peoples. We know where that goes. And kind of combined with everything else, it is a scary time. It's a very serious time. So that is kind of the general context of the conversation we're going to have. Um, it's unfortunate that we have to begin things in such a bleak place. But the good news is that there is a way out. So I know that's kind of not exactly what you were asking for, like the specificity, but it does seem like there is so much going on right now that there needs to be focused on.
No, yeah, but I think highlighting Kansas and Idaho as two, as you said before we started recording, black states, in the sense that like they were completely blacked out, um, in like the safety of trans folks on like a scale.
Yep.
Um,
In Aaron in the morning, Aaron Reed's legislative map, Kansas is one of two states that were completely blacked out, the other being Florida. I imagine, I don't want to speak for her, just I don't know Aaron, but I wouldn't be surprised if Idaho gets added to that list of no travel states during the next version of that map.
yeah, with this recent law passing, it wouldn't be surprising if that did happen, because it is so dangerous at this point. With that, it's I mean it's dangerous. It's just it's a witch hunt situation. If that's what it certainly is. It's like, you know, just going after anybody, who looks even vaguely gender non-conforming, you know?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And we've even seen this with um, the instructions that ICE has been essentially targeting people who appear to be transgender and also who appear to them to be immigrants. And
Hmm.
then they use that as an excuse to then seize identification, visas, and things like that. So it is very clear that what we are seeing is a targeted assault on the rights of transgender people in accompaniment with other marginalized and oppressed groups in America right now.
Yeah, no, and the attack on trans people has been so acute by the fascists and here in America and abroad. J.K. Rowling, while she may seem benign to some as just a Twitter warrior, she's actually very mobilized and funding a lot of anti-trans hate groups in the UK, and getting trans people blacklisted, for being trans. She's incredibly, dangerous currently, to trans folks, and should be regarded as such, as it stands.
Yeah, and I think that there was something that some of our Turkish comrades posted a really interesting article in which they talked about one of the things that is so interesting about this current iteration. of backlash and reactionary violence against transgender people is there is a sort of international comparing of notes. We know that the major legal attacks on transgender people did begin in the UK. And then a lot of the individuals, the so-called medical experts who were involved in those attacks, were then consulted in the United States for the
Mm.
drafting of particularly the second Trump regime's assaults. And now those American figures involved in this are then going abroad and giving advice and counsel to campaigns all across the world. And I think that is one of the things that is very different about this reactionary assault is there tends to be an international element where there's a lot more cooperation between countries that are engaged in this.
Right, yeah. And it's like I think that with the UK especially, they as you mentioned, like, a lot of this stuff started over there. I just saw a headline recently stating that one of like the largest like youth girls organizations just banned trans girls from their org. I forget exactly what it's called. But that's pretty significant as well. That's playing into everything, especially with trans people and children. It's playing
Mhm.
into this whole like stereotype and or like just like slander of trans people. Um, yeah, it's pretty like it's very acute over there in a way that it I would say it's quite similar to America. But it's happening in other ways as well.
Yeah. Even the International Olympic Committee, just
Yeah.
this last Thursday, announced the ban on transgender athletes in women's sports. So this truly has an international character to it, and it is going to begin to affect people. Well, it already is affecting people everywhere.
Yeah, no, and I think that especially for trans inmates who are in the middle of transitioning or have been transitioned, whatever the case may be for them, it's acutely dangerous, especially here in the American prison system, because of how unstable the prison system is and how corrupt and just gross a lot of prison
Mhm.
practices are. Trans women are at a much higher risk for sexual assault, much higher risk of abuse, and other terrible things happening because they're seen as easy targets.
Yes.
And especially, in some cases, in all cases, I would say trans women, especially when they're visibly trans, they're not complete, like, some people come out, um, but like especially being visibly trans, it is acutely dangerous.
Yes. And really the subject of the prisons, I think, is such a key to understanding the genuinely genocidal nature of what's going on here. Because in the prison system, we are seeing it's already being established as policy on the federal level. We should expect to see it more on the state level as well. Is this denial of gender affirming care to transgender inmates? Now, while that might not seem truly as genocidal on first glance, we have to remember that many trans inmates have already have received some form of gender confirmation surgery. And for those individuals who do not have the ability to make their own hormones, they are dependent on hormone replacement therapy for that.
Mm.
Without that, there is a whole litany of serious medical conditions, most notably osteoporosis, but others. And then there's just, of course, more importantly, just the risk of things like suicidal ideation, self-harm that comes up with these things. So it's very clear that what we are seeing is an attempt to cause as much harm and ultimately death as possible within this population. It's really transparent and profoundly ghoulish what's going on.
Yeah, I've heard plenty of comrades say death before deep transition. It's it's that serious. It is that serious. Like this is not a joke, this is not a game. Detransition, especially when it's forced, is very
Mhm.
dangerous. I didn't realize you could get osteoporosis. Is that correct?
Yes. W Not to get too deep into the medical aspect of this, but this is something that happens with cisgendered women when they experience menopause. There's a reason why hormone replacement therapy is so important. It can seriously affect bone density, and there are a lot of instances of transgender women who have been denied their access for one reason or another to HRT. And in some cases, you can lose as much as 65% of your bone density. It's a very serious
Oh my God.
situation. And that's just one of many potential um, health complications. And that's once again not even getting into the emotional and psychological aspects of what forcing detransition. I definitely want to make sure that I'm not minimizing
Hmm.
those less physiological consequences as well.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that, it's important to talk about it. It's not like the main focus, but it is important to talk about what happens, because this
Mhm.
is a serious issue, and this is like, like there's so much that can go wrong, which is why it's so important to have comprehensive medical care,
Mhm.
because it's not all of us require it, regardless of if you're transitioning or not, if you have anything going on, there's always, as you said, women who are going through menopause require hormone replacement therapy in some cases, like that's important. That's so incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think you're right to kind of tie it back into the need for comprehensive medical care. I, it's something that I know we have talked about a lot, and I definitely don't want to spend too much time just ultimately criticizing the queer liberation movement as it currently exists. But I think one of the major problems that we've seen is this separation of the struggle from queer people, for queer people, from the greater struggle against capitalism. And I think that is exactly a profound point where we see a key aspect of what it is that trans people need to have the ability to live their lives, live our lives, in the way that we need to, that is completely hamstrung by the private accumulation of capital in the healthcare industry. So this is a much broader issue than just like social recognition. This is a very serious struggle against the actual material conditions we exist in.
Yeah, and I think it's important to underscore that because it's the fact is that when we people have better access to medical care, better access to education, better access to material conditions that make life worth living, frankly.
Exactly.
I think people become much more reasonable. They become much more when they can see how these things are benefit, how socialism benefits them, when they can, feel that change in their life, it makes it much easier to soften the social rifts that have been, created between us by the capitalist class, um, in the forms of transphobia, racism, bigotry of all kinds, misogyny, all of it, and reason with people on why these things are wrong and bad and why they must be
Mhm.
eradicated.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think like you obviously you make a great point about like the way that things like transphobia are very successful at dividing the working class and kind of pitting us against each other. But I also think there's also a very important thing to see about how just simply the existence of transphobia ultimately is very beneficial to capitalism in general. It
Uh-huh.
exists, transphobia and the oppression of queer people. It does genuinely exist downstream of the oppression of women. And this is very valuable in that it allows the ruling class to maintain that control over things like reproductive labor and social reproduction, right? So
Uh-huh.
there is very much a reason why there is a lot of politicians, a lot of the same politicians who are very pro these repressive anti-transgender legislations are also very, very vehement in their restrictions of reproductive health and also tend to be very, very open to things like reducing the child labor laws. And
Right,
when you kind of view those things like in succession, it becomes obvious what they're doing. So not only is transphobia a very effective diversionary tactic, it's very, very valuable to the ruling class just intrinsically. And so once
right.
again, this just kind of all demonstrates the importance of noticing that this is not a struggle that happens in isolation. And we
Hmm.
desperately need to connect the struggle for queer liberation with the broader struggle against capitalism, against imperialism. Or it is going to always have the risk of being ineffective, which is, for the most part, what we have seen recently in a lot of these LGBTQIA uh, struggle organizations.
Right. It's like, the queer chamber of commerce is not your friend.
Yep.
They they're not here for you, buddy. That's more than obvious, honestly. But the people who are still bought in on capitalism as like the mode of production, they might believe that there is some kind of liberation in the queer chamber of commerce, which there is none to be found. We've tried,
Yeah.
trust me.
And it is very similar to just how much most of these various like mutual aid groups are like focused on like get out the vote campaigns. We got to really, really get behind, the various perceived progressive wings within the Democratic Party. And I really feel like we should have learned by now with how much Democrats in the aftermath of the failed Harris Waltz campaign
Yeah,
threw not only transgender people under the bus, but transgender people, immigrant rights groups, the Palestinian Solidarity Movement, any movement seeking even just the most vaguest pushes towards a socialism. All of this was blamed for the second Trump regime. So that tells us all we need to know about putting our faith in the Democratic Party. They are not going to come to our rescue. We've known this for a while, and yet somehow so much of the focus in so many of these groups is, well, we're going to get them on the midterms.
right.
When the midterm elections come, it's going to be our day of reckoning. And I'm like,
Sure.
it really, it is really devastating how much of our communities are focused on trying the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result this time.
No, exactly. And it's upsetting, honestly, because it's like why it's like you would think that people would eventually realize that this is not working. And I
Hmm.
think that there's a good amount of people that have. There's still a lot that haven't. And it's frustrating because, I especially got a lot of questions on why I wasn't gonna or why I didn't vote for Kamala Harris leading or why I wasn't going to and leading up to the election as well. And I'm like, if you don't draw the line at things like genocide, like what do you draw the line at?
Yeah, yeah,
You know?
absolutely.
Like if you
Um, oops,
sorry.
sorry.
Oh no, no.
No, no, no. You finish.
It's like if you can't draw the line at, milk toast, like quote unquote progressive ideas and some of the most horrendous foreign policy I've ever heard, like some of the most Republican foreign policy, coming from a so-called progressive party. Like, come on, people, have some respect for yourself. These people do not care about real working class issues. Trans people being, one of the groups that needs some of the most support right now in the government.
Mhm.
Like, come on.
Yeah, I genuinely think that a lot of it is that so many people in our communities, they have lost any hope that meaningful, systemic, bottom up change is possible.
Hmm.
Um, I see it a lot. I love the work. We mentioned Erin Reed and the Erin in the Morning
Hmm.
blog earlier, and the work that she does is very, very important. That being said, there is a tendency I have to sometimes like mute my updates for a day and then come back and catch up just because it can be such a bleak thing sometimes. And there has been a serious decline in any kind of optimism. And I absolutely understand that. It is difficult right now sometimes to imagine that there can be any kind of future
Right.
outside of what we have. So I think for a lot of people, the best thing they can possibly imagine is going back to the Biden years,
Yeah.
going back to the Obama years.
Yeah.
And that is understandable to a degree. Um, but I think it's going to be especially important for those of us engaging in our in organization, those of us involved in organizing along Marxist-Leninist lines, that we reinvigorate and re-engage people's optimism. That revolutionary optimism is going to be incredibly important going forward.
Yeah, and I think that like that's a great segue, honestly, because it sounds like all doom and gloom right now. And I mean, to an extent, it's I mean, it sucks. It certainly does. But now is the time more than ever to be getting out there and supporting trans folks. Um, we should always be doing that, frankly. But it's if you're on the fence about it, then the time is now. The time has not, there's never been more of a pointed time than now to do it. Um, and if it means starting out small and doing what you can with the spare time that you have, we're all busy, we're all working, we're all trying to make it through. I get it. Start small, but at least start something. That's the key here.
Yeah. Obviously, like it's an important needle to thread because it is important to remain informed about what's going on. And it's also important not to minimize how dangerous things are and can continue to be right now.
Oh yeah, definitely.
We never want to kind of be overinflated with any kind of arrogance or or dismissiveness. That being said, we have to make sure that we never allow that to bog us down so much that we get apathetic. Because there is still a tremendous amount that we can do. And we have a lot to go on in terms of like examples. The queer community has historically been very, very involved in radical and militant struggle. That's something we've talked about before. So we know that it's possible. We also have examples of countries that to one degree or another have engaged in degrees of socialist construction that have created societies that are very, very um, positive in their support for queer people. The obvious example is, of course, Cuba, the country with the most progressive family code, a
Yeah.
country with tremendous degrees of support in terms of gender affirming care.
Yes, speak
So,
it.
like, we know we have things to look at for how to move forward. And it's important that when we are keeping a track of the things going on, we also keep in mind we have a path forward. We have the necessary tools, and we just need to continue to building with what we have and working towards initiating that social revolution. That is going to be the way forward for trans liberation. And not just that, but the liberation of all people, because we cannot view the liberation of queer people as existing separately from the liberation of all people who are toiling under capitalism.
No, absolutely. And I think it's incredibly important to highlight, especially Revolutionary Thought actually has a video about this on her channel, or sorry, not their channel, on their channel. And it's on queerness and like queerness in the Soviet Union. And like what gender, how gender was viewed. And one of the things is, there was a scientist in the Soviet Union who supposed that there were, infinite genders. It was very progressive. There was a lot of progressive elements. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but there was still a lot of good happening over there as well.
Yeah. One of the things that Leslie Feinberg worked out in their research on the subject was that particularly up to the late 20s, there was even considerable back and forth correspondence between medical institutions in the Soviet Union and Max Hirschfeld, who
Hmm.
was a pioneer in the provision of care and medical support to not just trans people, but queer people of multiple different persuasions. There is a lot there. Once again, as you mentioned, nothing is ever perfect. That's kind of a meaningless word.
Yeah,
However,
exactly.
we know that it was incredibly far-reaching compared to its time. So we
Mm.
do have tremendous points of reference that we can look to.
Yeah. No, and that's like what's important as well is to look at the fact that it is possible, that it has happened before and that it's currently happening and we can make it happen here. Like it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to live this way.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that it's incredibly important to recognize this fact and to recognize that um, it's hard right now, absolutely, but there is always something that we can do. And we can do it within solid principles and understanding of praxis and, how do we keep up with the masses and ensure that we are not adventuring outside of what we are capable of right now, but continue to read the context accurately and understand how we can push forward and do more revolutionary and radical action.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely. And I want to like before I kind of jump into some of the things you're talking about, I want to very specifically kind of put a disclaimer out there. Um, None of what I'm talking about, what we're talking about, should ever make somebody convinced that they are not right to feel scared at times. It is perfectly natural to experience fear in these circumstances. So, as we kind of go through and talk about the reasons we have for optimism and what we can do, it's important to recognize that if you're not occasionally experiencing fear, that's it's human to do so. Things are scary now, so please make sure that you're always giving yourself some understanding there. However,
Absolutely.
it there is a lot that we can go on, and so we've had some great examples over the years. The first time I think I came on here, I talked a lot about STAR, about the Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. One of the earliest trans liberation groups founded in the United States. Um, I will always, if I have an opportunity, love to talk about Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, the incredible work they did, the connections that existed between their work and the Black Panthers and other revolutionary organizations. But you can look in a lot of cities and see that there are folks organizing, trying to set up mutual aid, um, doing things like community defense. And all of those things are wonderful, and that's really great. I think the key jump that those of us who are wanting to kind of infuse that class consciousness and that revolutionary optimism is helping people to understand the necessity of taking the next step. Once we have infrastructure, the ability to help people get access to HRT if they aren't able to, having access to affirming clothes and other elements of material support there, the necessity of taking the next step. And I think what I have noticed in some of the spaces I have been is a little bit of a resistance to connecting this struggle to other struggles. I have noticed in some cases a resistance of wanting these mutual aid groups to get involved in, say, things like anti-ICE demonstrations. And people will point out things like, well, it's very scary for a transgender woman to put herself in a position where she might get arrested. And I understand that, right? Like that is something that I think about quite often. Obviously, I don't want to find myself in a men's prison for all of the things we talked about and more. That being said, it is really important to recognize that as scary as it is for us to face down those circumstances, we need to imagine what it is like for our immigrant neighbors who are facing that. And so we need to be getting involved in as broad a possible variety of struggles. Transgender people belong in the trenches when it comes to the struggles for immigrant rights, whether it's the or the struggle for Palestinian solidarity. We need to be involved in worker struggles. All of these things. And I think that is genuinely what is lacking. We have a strong sense of community solidarity in the greater trans community. What we need, though, is connecting that to a broader political consciousness. And I think that is where the struggle is going to need to lie.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think that, it's amazing, really, what revolutionary theory can do for a movement. Instead of just doing sporadic, spontaneous shows of force against the capitalist class, um, this is a very coordinated, put together, um, and pointed attack on our class enemy.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
uh,
And oh, sorry.
oh no, 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 you go ahead, go ahead.
And I think one of the things is that we're going to need to really like ground ourselves in the reality of the situation we find ourselves in. I talk to a lot of people who are like, yeah, we need to build like a transgender commune out in the woods somewhere, and we'll live off of like foraging and things like that. And
Girl,
there is this very like utopian anarchist idea of like living apart from the rest of society. And that is so far to the opposite of what we need to be doing.
it is such a petite
Um,
bourgeois like fantasy.
yes.
God, that's
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Not to get repetitive, but the focus needs to be on integrating the trans struggle into the broader struggles. I've said that quite a few times today. Hopefully, it's not coming off as too repetitive, but that is so critical. This is not an isolated struggle. We cannot be so individualist about this. Uh, it separating ourselves from the broader class struggle, the broader anti-war and anti-imperialist struggle, is the surest possible way I can think of making things genuinely hopeless. Things are not hopeless now. Um, However, if we do isolate ourselves, they could be. That is the quickest way to make things as bleak as they seem.
Yeah, no, and I don't think you're beating a dead horse with, the repeated discussion about, infusing the trans struggle with the larger class struggle, because and pushing that and being repetitive with that because people need to realize, get it into their skulls that these are the same movements. They need to be the
Mhm.
same movements. They have the same goals, the same aspirations. And socialism is the factor of liberation.
Yeah,
Socialism is how we get to liberation.
yeah,
It is the tried and true scientific way in which we can get to a point in society where trans people are fully integrated and accepted, no questions asked, where
yeah,
the oppression of oppressed nationalities, of women, of labor, is dispelled. And the only way we can get there is through revolutionary socialism. And we're not going to, that we're not. I'm not going to run around in the forest and pick fucking clovers. Like,
Yeah.
come on, people.
Yeah. Um, it, it, I'm trying to find like the powers. It just, I think it speaks to just how much of the the radical history of queer liberation has been successfully obfuscated. We need
Hmm.
to like reclaim this. This is another thing that I talk about. I feel like every time that I come on here is reestablishing our connection to that history and then taking it forward by making sure that we are connecting it with not just the struggle of of other oppressed peoples, but with accurate analysis, a theoretical analysis, and the ability to learn both from our victories and our failures, and continue to get more organized, more disciplined, and that is going to be the key. Not
Yes.
not decentralizing it, not diffusing it out into um, isolated rural communities or communes. That is not the way forward.
Yeah, and I think that, looking forward and, seeing, as you said, pushing forward that revolutionary optimism and paying it forward to the further movement. I think, some ways that we can on the ground be effective, get stuff, do what needs to be done to infuse this theory and this praxis with the movement at large, to get people moving, to get people educated, is through things like mutual aid, distribution
Mhm.
of education, distribution of things like HRT medication,
Yep.
the creation of it, um, setting up of mutual aid distribution lines. Another thing is reading groups, creating an
Hmm.
educational reading group. Perhaps it can be around queer issues, but more, infused with the principles of Marxism-Leninism, um, preferably anti-revisionism.
Hmm. Yes.
um, like, this is how we win.
Yeah. It's incredibly important for us to show up and find ourselves where the people are, right? If your city has a queer mutual aid group, um, show up, involve yourself, get integrated in that, and then we can find methods of like you said, starting reading groups or engaging in other political education. All of these things are great, but they only work if we're actually showing up and doing the on the ground work. And so that really definitely needs to be our focus. We can talk all we want about the things that we need to do, but if we're not showing up and actually getting involved in the on the ground work, it's all for naught. So if we have groups that we can join in our areas, we should be doing that. If not, this definitely shows that there is probably the possibility for forming our own group. That's a lot of work, but there are tools for that. One of the things that we are in the very early stages of working on in Kansas City is getting a trans liberation mass org going. Very early stages, um, but we
Yes, very
also
early.
have groups involved in the area who are doing mutual aid work that we can make common cause with, learn from, like we're talking, compare notes and things like that. So none of this works if we are not finding ourselves where the struggles are happening and getting involved to whatever degree we can.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about, finding people with like-minded causes, seeing the potential in them, seeing the revolutionary potential in them, recognizing where we can strategically place ourselves to
Mhm.
maximize our ability to impact our community in a positive way for this, and spread that revolutionary thought.
Yes.
Marxism-Leninism. What are the methods? What are the tried and true methods? what do the experts say, and how do we measure that, and how do we understand it? What is dialectics? What is
Yep.
materialism? How do we what is the party? you know
Yep.
should you join the party? Should you just be a supporter of the party? um like, these are the burning questions of our movement.
Yeah. And and I think like understanding just how interconnected all of these forms of repression are. Like you were talking about, like understanding things dialectically and how none of these things happen independent of other issues. I obviously live in a state where reproductive health is under constant, sometimes more acute, sometimes more background assault legally. It's going to, for a very long time in Kansas, reproductive health will be under assault in one form or another. It is a very, very core belief of mine that trans people should be showing up for every struggle in support of reproductive health. It is so obviously and directly linked to our access to healthcare and to the ability to socially transition and live our lives. It goes for things like the struggle for immigrant rights, for the struggle for workers' rights, all of these things we need to be showing up for, and we need to be as close to the vanguard as we possibly can in these, because it both directly affects us and it directly affects others in our communities as well. So being involved in and being as vigorously involved as possible is so incredibly important, and understanding just how deeply connected all of these things are, and the need for imparting that discipline and that organization to these struggles.
Yeah, with the principles of dialectical materialism, I feel like, this is a little side tangent of mine. I feel like in the recent, movement, there's been a lot of online presence of leftists. There's been a little cove of communists kind of, peeping out
Hmm.
from behind the algorithm. A lot of us, are small or have like a relatively good size following, but nothing insane. Probably the most followed openly quote unquote leftist is Hassan Piker, which is debatable. Um, so, you know, it's something that really gets on my nerves recently is the centering of one's own personality and self on
Hmm.
their platform rather than the movement itself,
Yes.
to a point where it's not even about the movement, it's about your own gain, or what you can
Hmm.
get from the movement rather than what the movement can gain from you.
Yep.
um I think I'm really proud of, some influencers that I know who use their platform to get supplies and bring it to Cuba,
Hmm.
and who, use their platforms to platform the current situation in Cuba and how to help. There was some controversy with that, but there's a lot of people like Bad and Bonata went. A friend of the show, Lily Agla, went. She's based in Chicago. Um, I do know Hassan Piker did go. He did go. There's so many people, so many communist folk who are going. Um, and it's that kind of stuff that I'm really happy that they're doing. But I do sometimes fear other creators. It can become a slippery slope, and so we need to continue to center the movement.
Yeah, yeah, and making sure that while we can recognize that there is some organizational and educational work that can be done online, the real work is being done on the streets. It is being
Yes.
done in the real world, in confronting capitalism in material ways. So we have to make sure that it never gets focused on just online presence, because that is very limited in its ability to actually win.
exactly. And I I think that it's incredibly important to maintain our understanding of the conditions, to not become too wrapped up in our own media feeds, um, to be aware of how we are being co-opted, because that's happening all the time, especially with parties like the Democratic Party. They hate us because they ain't us. Um, they never will be us. So it's incredibly important to, as we move forward with the movement of trans liberation and just liberation of the working class at large, we need to be so cautious of how we go about it to ensure that we are centering the movement always, not the individual, but the collective. How can we all benefit from this and understand that our liberation is wrapped up in each other's liberation? This is not about a single individual, but rather, an entire class of people.
Yeah. And kind of bringing things back to like the importance of optimism. I can only speak for myself and maybe the experiences of some people I've known personally. But for me, I find like pessimism to be a deeply like insular, um, I, I feel like self-centered is a little strong of a word, but it
Hmm.
is very self-focused,
Right.
feeling for me. It's very isolative. It's very inwardly facing. And that is why I think revitalizing revolutionary optimism is so important because optimism is very outward focused. It's very connective, and it really, like you said, recenters things back to what can we collectively do? What can we do today to make ourselves stronger tomorrow? Is the way that we have to think. And you cannot do that if we're doom scrolling, if we're so focusing on how scary and bad things are. Allow yourself to feel fear, allow yourself to feel sadness, and then collect yourself and then get back out into the trenches. I'm not trying to make it sound overly simplistic because I know it's not, but that is what has to happen. We cannot afford pessimism right now. It is a luxury we do not have the ability to indulge.
Yeah, no, and I think like that especially is so important to underscore, is like the fact of the matter is that, we can be in our feelings all day about this, but the streets are waiting. We
Hmm.
have a world to win.
Yep.
This is the fight is not over. And acting as though it's already over before we even started,
Hmm.
like there is so much optimism to be had, and it can be found within your community. It can be found within revolutionary theory. It can be found within education and praxis, and um, you know, just spending time with your loved ones as well. Remember to take time and be in the
Hmm.
moment. There's always, it's the fact is that it's all connected, as you said. All of this is connected. It is dialectical. This all has a relationship with itself, and maintaining ourselves means, um, like I said, participating in your community, participating in your family and friend events, being
Hmm.
part of community and being part of the larger movement, because we are social creatures at the end of the day. Um, so I think that what you said is spot on.
Yeah, yeah, and of course we kind of exist in a cultural context that definitely tries to atomize us, to have us focusing on individual issues. Uh, I think like specifically to the transgender community, how much of like our focus can be centered on my personal transition, my personal needs and comfort. And I don't want, of course, anyone to kind of walk away from this saying like I should be completely disregarding my own comfort and my own needs. However, hyper focusing on that is a big part of the reason why we find our communities so isolated from one another and so politically disengaged. And I think that has to be the thing that we reclaim. Um, the earliest movements for gay and queer liberation in this country were not focused on individual struggles. It was a collective struggle. And just reclaiming that history, reclaiming that militant presence is going to be so incredibly impactful for our communities, and not just in terms of like political struggle, but just in overall happiness, right? Like you said, we're social creatures. The more isolated, the more atomized we are, that does not tend to be good for our health, be it physical, mental, or emotional.
Yeah, and it's also important to remember that, taking care of yourself is important.
Hmm.
Ensuring that, you're eating enough, you're sleeping enough, you're as long as it's not straying into the territory of like I'm just not going to do anything. It's too hard. Like I'm sorry, but it's too hard is not an excuse. And I'm not trying to be one of those MAGA like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You gotta, suck it up, buttercup. But it is like to an extent, it is like, okay, I get it. It's scary, it's hard, and it sucks, and we can acknowledge that. But that doesn't make it any less necessary to fight back against.
Yeah. I we and this isn't even something that I think just like specifically exists in the queer community. I think there
Oh
are
yeah, no, definitely not.
particular pronouncements of it that I recognize a lot within the queer community, but there's an allergy to struggle, an allergy to discomfort that we are going to have to um get over. Once again, it's probably not the right word, but come to terms with. Once again, not saying don't take care of yourself. Please take care of yourself. Please make sure that you are, to the degree that you're able, taking care of your health. But at the same time, we cannot use words like struggle and fight and imagine that it is not at times going to be uncomfortable and difficult. And it will not always be fun. Sometimes it can be, sometimes it will be exciting, but other times, it might be uh not exciting but boring, or like we said, unpleasant. We have to, though. We do not have an option to stay out of this. We have a world to win, and we have incredibly high stakes if we um just cede the field to our political enemies.
Exactly. And, that means uncomfortable, being uncomfortable doesn't necessarily mean dire circumstances, but it sometimes does mean, like, for example, back a little while ago, there was a Target boycott going on. Now, I know it wasn't the best. There was some lived up elements of it, but there were well coordinated elements of it as well that actually put in a very well targeted, well organized boycott can cause a lot of damage. But it also means on our end giving something up.
Hmm.
For Black folks back in the 1960s, at the time of Rosa Parks and all of them, organizing bus boycotts and everything, that meant not taking the
Yep.
bus. You know, that
Yep.
meant going out of your way to say, I will not participate in this. And it only works if it's a collective, organized, pointed, acute struggle.
Hmm.
It cannot just be, I'm gonna not go to Starbucks sometimes. No, I haven't been to Starbucks in 3 years.
Yep. No Starbucks.
No
Uh,
Starbucks. I go to Cafe Paradiso, Champaign, Illinois. No, Urbana, Illinois. Cafe Paradiso is beautiful. I love it. Um, but maybe it costs you a little bit, but in the long run, this is the juice that gets us going.
yeah.
This is how we get results.
Yep. And it can be on a lot of different fronts. It can be something as little as doing things that just maybe go outside of like your social comfort level. I'm a pretty shy person, or at least I can be. Uh, um, I can tend to get social anxiety. So it's not always necessarily comfortable for me to like go into protests or demonstrations, especially ones that are maybe a little more confrontational. And I'm not going to say that I always win that fight, but it's really important to me that I'm constantly fighting that fight. So we all have the things that we have to do to make ourselves uncomfortable. And we might find ourselves in situations that do really make us uncomfortable or do put us at risk. And we're going to have to like figure out what it is that we can do. But it is so important that as much as we can, we get involved in these struggles meaningfully. Um, because the alternative just isn't an option.
Exactly. And, meaningfully in earnest and in a way that is, organized and clear-eyed.
Yes.
We're not allowing any fantasies or idealism to cloud our judgment.
Yeah.
This is it is important that we get this right,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah, and I think you touched on a thing. We talked a lot about revolutionary optimism, and we kind of have to kind of talk about the importance of not, as you say, like allowing that to like lead into any kind of arrogance or maybe going past what we can at this point do. And so it's important that we temper everything. The whole point of being Marxist-Leninist is we need to be scientific, we need to be analytical, and deliberate in the
Yeah,
steps that.
to a fault.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's incredibly important with that analysis to recognize the conditions, the variables that we can absolutely account for that we know exist that are credible, and to be willing to change our analysis as conditions change and as we get new information, and recognize that we just have to be completely and totally honest with ourselves about what the
Hmm.
situation is at hand. It's not, we don't have, there's no time for errors.
Yep.
Now is the time to be as awake and like eyes wide open. you
Yep.
know we're not sleeping on this issue anymore. This is now.
Mm-mm.
This is for real.
Yep. And
um
oh,
yeah.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
And to also have the humility to engage in self-criticism,
Yes,
when mistakes are
yes.
made and to learn from them and to correct as soon as we possibly can, which I think is something that we in the career struggle can really benefit from. We know the things that have not worked in our struggles, and we need to learn from those mistakes, and we need to learn from them quickly.
Right, exactly. And we need to be just so incredibly honest with ourselves. That to me is, some of the most important, like one of the most important things we can do is just be honest, and be frank. Frankness is just, we were talking about this in the audiovisual channel a few weeks ago, but frankness is so incredibly useful and important to the movement. It's how we get things done. Don't
Mhm.
sugarcoat. You tell me what it is, you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't lie, but especially don't lie to yourself.
Gosh, yeah. No, yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And as we finish up here, as we wrap up and everything, is there anything that we want to push specifically as praxis or, movement building efforts? Is there anything we want to push before we sign off today?
Just kind of keeping things like applicable to people in every location where this might be heard. It's just find where the work is being done. If you live in a college town that has a lot of like community centers or mutual aid groups, get involved there. Find out where it is that we can get engaged with the largest cross section of our communities. Most larger cities and towns will have some form of LGBTQ Discord chat or Signal chat. Just get involved and find out where the people are doing the work. Whether that's with explicitly queer groups or things like Food Not Bombs, wherever the people are, get in contact and just show up to do the work. Um, we need to make sure that we are reliable and trustworthy in these movements before we can start to get involved with raising the level of consciousness. So as our comrades have often say, go to the things, whatever they are, get involved. and make yourself useful. That is the key thing. And from there, find opportunities to engage in political education, find ways to engage with imparting the organization and discipline that we need. But we can't do that um, on Twitter. We have to do it on the ground where the people are. So
Speak
find out
it.
where the people are and get yourself there too.
Get off of Twitter,
Get off of
please.
Twitter.
Get off of Twitter. Stop giving Elon your time. Stop it. Get off of that godforsaken app. X. Ugh. Yeah, no. What so well said. So well said, Marina. Yeah, no. And as we finish up today, I think that what Marina said is a great way to leave this off because, this is how we move forward. You put your finger on the pulse of where the movement is in your area, find it, organize with it, be part of it, gain, build comrades, build trust, build community, and then move from there. Educate people, build reading groups, build educational groups and initiatives. Be part of that. And if there's a party chapter near you or a party division near you, apply. If you're interested in anti-revisionist Marxism-Leninism, apply.
You're a young person, get involved in
Yeah,
RYR.
if you're a young person, get involved in Red Youth Rising. If there's not a chapter near you, we'll help you find one. We do it all the time. We've done it with at least 3 now. So get involved. There are things happening. It's time. So yeah, thank you, Marina. This was such a productive conversation.
Thank you very much for having me again. I'm always excited to be on the show.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm gonna go ahead.